Have you met Duffy yet? Do you know Duffy out at the forensic clinic? He's mad. He's right around the bend. Oh, good show. Morning, Frank. Suzanne, we'll go in closer on Frank, will we? And then right in on him. He's a great... Good morning. Another happy day on the Webster Shore with a number of bright, provocative reports. And the first one will be coming to you from Frank Howard, the NDP House Leader in Victoria. What in the name of goodness is going on over there now? Don't answer yet, Frank. And how long will this session last? It could last until Christmas with absolutely nothing achieved. And then we're going to cheer you up with the problems of a little farmer in Delta. It's hard to believe in this day and age that we're still pouring hundreds of gallons of milk down the tube. Maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, but it seems awful stupid to me. And we'll be dealing with that and my reporter, Brian Coxford. And also this morning, to give you a bright, happy outlook for the weekend, we're going to be speaking to both sides of the continued dispute involving government nurses and psychiatric nurses. And I have in the studio three officials. Nora from the R.N.A.B.C, Glen Smale, the Labour Relations Advisor, and George Neeson from the Psychiatric Nurses. And from Victoria too, you won't see his picture, but you'll recognize him when he comes up. We'll be having Mr. Mike Davison of G.E.R.B, the Government Employees Relations Bureau. But first it'll be Frank Howard after the break. Good morning to Frank Howard, the House Leader of the NDP. And Frank, you're the first politician I've heard in years complaining about the fact that you weren't getting enough work to do. But seriously, I want to ask you, what has been achieved so far during the 7 or 8 days of the Premier's estimates, and when does it look to you that the House will be over for the season?
Well, Jack, we had the sorry spectacle yesterday of the Premier absolutely refusing to respond to legitimate questions about meetings that were held in his office at which he is supposed to have made a deal with Victoria businessmen using taxpayers' money to subsidize a jet foil service between Seattle and Victoria. That's a legitimate question the Premier just absolutely refused, stonewalled all the way along. As long as he persists in refusing to deal with the general public about what commitments he's made with respect to the use of the general public's money, then who knows how long we're going to be here.
Are you telling me that with the, and I've seen some of it myself in Victoria, with the Premier's refusal to answer direct questions, for instance, on the sale of uranium, or whether he got any phone calls about the new appointment replacing the former Chief Justice, or the hydrofoil, I thought that had been announced, that the government was committed to a jet foil service to buttress the Marguerite, or rather the Queen of whatever that's going to run to Victoria.
There are two problems, Jack. One is that the announcement was made that involved the BC Development Corporation, which is a Crown corporation. That is financed by public funds. The meeting was held in the Premier's office. He was the one that expedited the whole thing, and he refuses to disclose what commitments were made to that group that's going to run that hydrofoil, and that's the fundamental question. You remember the Premier's statement a few years ago of not a dime without debate? Well, this is exactly what this is. No opportunity to find out from the Premier because he refuses to answer what the deal was itself.
Is a Premier of a province not entitled to have secret meetings or off-the-record meetings with businessmen in his office, and is he not entitled to refuse to tell you what happened at these meetings?
He's entitled to have the meetings. He's entitled to work to the advantage of the general public, certainly. But when public announcements are made that public funds are going to be used, as they are in this case, as a subsidy to a corporation or a company or a group of businessmen to run a hydrofoil, then that's public business. And if he wants to say that he is entitled not to answer that question, then let him say that. Let him stand up and say in the House, that's none of your business.
He hasn't even said that.
He hasn't said that.
He
no,
just
sir.
stonewalls it.
He doesn't, yeah, absolutely. Refuses. He's got calluses on his hands from the amount of stones that he's piling up in front of him.
Are you telling me that the NDP tactic is, during the Premier's debate on the Premier's estimates, which give you a wide range over all government subjects, that you're not going to let go of this estimate session in his department alone until he answers the questions, and that this could go on for weeks?
Well, no, what I said, Jack, is so long as the Premier continues to refuse to answer those legitimate questions, and you touched a couple of them, the sale of uranium to, or the proposed sale of uranium in Europe, the Ferris situation, and now this, apart from all of the other involvements, is so long as the Premier refuses to answer those legitimate questions, I don't know how long we're going to be able to spend on his estimates.
Has anything been achieved yet to be non-partisan, if that were possible by you, Mr. Howard, during the session so far?
Well, the government has not introduced much in the way of legislation. We've had a couple of little insignificant bills introduced, apart from bills which are founded upon the budget. We are currently alternating debate between the Premier's estimates and Bill 7, which is a conglomerate bill seeking to spend 180-some millions of dollars on things like the Annacis Island Bridge and the Barkerville Restoration Fund and so on.
Kind of housekeeping bill.
They're not housekeeping bills, Jack. This one follows upon the statement in the budget, and it involves the expenditure of 188 or something like that millions of dollars. I don't look upon that as being housekeeping. I think that's pretty fundamental. But the government has not brought forward any consequential legislation, anything of importance, except those bills which were founded upon the budget.
What about the Ritchie case? I was flabbergasted when Ritchie was quoted outside the House as saying that had he been left at the tender mercies of the RCMP, and had it not been for the protection of the Attorney General's department, he might not have been sitting in the House. And your people attempted to get that in front of a committee of privilege. We're talking, of course, about Ritchie, where it was decided by the Attorney General's department that no charge was proper in that particular case. What have you achieved on that?
Well,
have you lost the battle on that committee of privilege?
Jack, I was just as flabbergasted as you were when I read that statement. I thought to myself, my heavens, what an admission to make. What a thing to say about the Attorney General's involvement, when he's gone the other direction. Yesterday, the Speaker, that's Walter Davison sitting in for the Speaker, ruled that it could not properly be raised in the House as a question of privilege, but that would not prevent the matter from being raised in another way and in another form. Whether or not that will happen is hard to say at this time. But as a question of privilege per se, the Speaker ruled that we couldn't proceed in that fashion. Alec MacDonald is following it up. Alec, who raised the question in the first place, seeking to get further, action and further clarification on it. The door is not closed. We thought it had been closed, and Ritchie, with that foolish statement,
opened the whole can of worms again.
Opened the whole thing all up again. That's his doing, not ours.
Last point, Frank Howard. Premier Bennett and at least two of his cabinet colleagues, I should presume the Energy Minister and Gardaí Gardam, must go to Lethbridge for the Western Premiers on Monday, April 21st. As you know as well as I do, this brings, with the Speaker's illness, the House to an even balance, and if somebody falls over and breaks a leg, the NDP could technically defeat the government.
Yes.
Are you waiting all agog for just such a situation next week?
No, we don't want anybody to break their leg or anything to occur on an individual basis.
I was speaking allegorically.
But yeah, I know, Jack, but I had to say it anyway because we don't. Look, what's involved here is this, and this is the question of pairing. Maybe the general public doesn't understand what pairing is, but this is exactly what it is. It means the government, for its own purposes, whatever those purposes are, or an individual member of the cabinet, for whatever reason he has, approaches the opposition and says, will you, a member of the opposition, pair with me? Now, if that request is made to me, what the government is asking me to do is to abandon my responsibility to my constituents to vote on their behalf in the House in case a vote comes up during this pairing period. And that permits the cabinet minister or the government to go about doing whatever it was it wanted to do. And as a consequence, I've denied the people that elected me the right to have their member of the legislature vote on their behalf in the House. Now, I don't think that's a very appropriate request to make.
Oh, come now, Frank Howard. That's done time and time again, year in, year out in Ottawa for a matter of convenience. It allows the government to do its business and allows the opposition MP to do what he likes, too.
Jack, I'm sorry. During that time there's a lot of static on this end, and I didn't hear what you said.
I was merely saying that pairing is commonplace and often done between sophisticated parties in normal circumstances.
Well, all right, if you want to talk about pairing and what is normally done, let me tell you this. We have had one formal conversation that's before the House opened between the government House leader and myself with respect to pairing, one only, and before the legislature opened, and there hasn't been one since. All the other conversations about pairing, so-called, have been political statements made by the government seeking to gain some kind of advantage, whatever it is, I don't know, at the political level. And I just simply say that if they're interested in a sophisticated way, as you put it, in dealing with that particular question, then why not be gentlemanly about it and come forward and discuss a specific?
Frank Howard, you know perfectly well what sticks in the craw of the NDP and Mr. Barrett is that when Barrett was Premier, he invited the opposition and the other party leaders to go with him to these key conferences. And your nose is out of joint because Bennett won't do the same thing.
No, my nose is not out of joint, Jack. I was talking with you about pairing generally. When it comes to this specific question, what I wonder about is why somebody in the news media hasn't said to Mr. Bennett, directly to him, look, the NDP, when it was government, extended this courtesy to you because you represented a good block of people in the province. What's wrong now?
I think I did, but I can't remember the answer.
Well, the answer was probably another Stonewall, Jack. He's quite adept at that, the Premier, you know.
All right, are you looking forward to a chance to beat the government next? Or do you think Bennett will adjourn the House next week so there's no danger of a defeat so that he and his troops can go off to the Premier's conference in the West?
I've no idea, Jack, because the government doesn't confide in us in what its plans are. We find out, in matter of fact, about the day's business sometimes a half an hour to 15 minutes before the House starts. We don't even know what's liable to come up on the agenda.
Bad feeling?
I'm sorry?
Bad feeling?
No, not a bad feeling. We are prepared. We are prepared for whatever they may want to raise. But the mere fact that the government itself is not, being courteous enough and even giving us advice or information as to what they plan to deal with in the afternoon, for argument's sake, indicates that, they're a little bit off base on the whole process of parliamentary government.
Well, at least there have been no more corridor scenes. Things seem to be getting duller and cooler in Victoria. You would agree with that, Mr. Howard, wouldn't you?
Well, part of the reason for that is maybe that I'm staying out of the way of that wild man from Kamloops.
And vice versa. And vice versa.
Well, is that what he said?
No, I'm just protecting his back a smidgen. My thanks to Frank Howard. I'll be back with the nurses. Thanks, Frank.
Enjoyed being with you, Jack.
Oh, and I'm sure you love this much more than you loved Ottawa.
Indeed I do. It's home.
It's home. Home, sweet home. Frank Howard, next to nurses. And the man from G.E.R.B, after the break. I remember when labor disputes used to be labor disputes. When it was the IWA and the machinists and the plumbers and the carpenters and the kind of real trade unions of Canada's historic labor movement. And now what do we have? Only a couple of weeks ago, I had Nora Paton, the Chief Executive Officer of the Registered Nurses Association of BC, on the air with her colleagues, shortly before they got that very fair, I was going to say incredibly good, but you'll hit me, that just settlement, which seems to be about to be ratified, of 44-point-something% over 27 months,
That's right? Yes, Jack.
And we thought everything had been put happily to bed and tucked in. And then up come the health science workers, who had signed the kind of average level contract, and they want a contract reopened, right?
That's right.
And you knew this was going to happen, didn't you?
No.
And now come another 2,700 members of your union, is that correct?
That's right.
And you don't mind me calling it a union.
No.
And Mr. Smale is going to tell me that you're all set to jump on other BCGEU operations with picket lines, the ferries, the liquor board, etc., if you don't get the pound of flesh for them too. Is that correct?
Well, that's what the headlines in the province said yesterday, Jack.
Forget the headlines. You tell me what's in your head.
At the present time, we're taking the position as a union, the BC government nurses, that we're looking at our own territories for a strike initially, but we would be remiss if we did not look at other potential strike areas.
But these nurses, and we'll explain the situation in a moment, are not people for whom the lack of services will seriously inconvenience the public to begin with.
In some areas, that is true, that there are certain areas where that may not inconvenience. There are others, such as the Pearson Hospital, and areas such as the Forensic Psychiatric Institute, where there must be nurses present, as well as in some of the other major institutes, such as Riverview and Valley View.
Okay, just give me my terms of reference first. These nurses cover things like the Forensic Institute, the Pearson Hospital,
Riverview.
And that's why George Neeson of the Psychiatric Nurses is here this morning, is that right?
Yes.
But then many are kind of civil servant jobs.
All of us are public servants.
No, but I'm talking about the not non-essential, but the ones that the public wouldn't notice. What are they? The inside nurses.
The members of our union that struck yesterday were primarily in the area where they did not have direct patient contact to a large degree, if that's what you're trying to get at.
These would be nurses within departments.
That's right.
Now, what's the dispute?
The dispute has been, and continues to be, the government's insistence on aligning us with other unions to which they negotiate in a 3-year agreement of 8% in each of those 3 years.
Such as BCGEU settled for, more or less, overall.
That's correct.
But you want to catch up with the other registered nurses in the hospital and healthcare industry. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. You used the term catch-up. You and your listeners should be aware that for the past 6 years, the bargaining history of this particular union, representing both psychiatric nurses and registered nurses, is such that on a monthly basis we have been paid more than the nurses in the general hospitals. So we are not asking for a catch-up. We are currently 4% ahead, based on the 79 wage rates.
On their old agreement.
That's correct. We are asking for, now the term parity or comparability are some of those terms, but we're asking, where applicable, the identical wage rates of those nurses in the general hospitals.
You're asking for 39% over 27 months instead of 44%
That's
over
correct.
27 months.
That's correct.
Where do you stand on your strike eligibility? You've already struck some operations.
I'm not
Have you already
clear.
been on strike in some places?
Yes, we struck yesterday.
Where did you strike yesterday?
We struck in a number of areas which we deem to be relatively non-essential insofar as working with patients or clients. The areas were the medical coders in Victoria, who process all the medical forms and hospitalization forms of this province.
Mm-hmm.
We struck in the area of the long-term care assessors, and in the areas of counselors for the Drug and Alcohol Commission, and in the occupational health nurses of the province that look after essentially their own members.
But you haven't yet touched the mental health units or Acala or Alouette River or the Juvenile Detention Centre or the public health units outside of Vancouver and Victoria.
At this point in time, the answer is no, we haven't touched those.
Well, you looked at your watch. When are you going to touch them? Sometime today?
Well, we have made it a public statement that we're playing this very close to the vest, and I have to maintain that position, but I would say that certainly escalating strikes are not out of the question. They are a very real issue with our nurses.
Have you yet used pickets to prevent the entry of other unionized employees to any of the operations where you're now on strike?
No, I think a trade union concept, Jack, is that you have to look at your own membership areas first, and this is what we're doing. We're looking at our areas, and we're prepared to let a little bit of our blood initially. Those pickets may come up, but when they come up, they're going to affect other other unions as well.
Now, surely I must have some sympathy with G.E.R.B's position. I'll be talking to Mr. Davison. But he made a settlement with Fryer and the boys, BCGEU. Fryer flipped his lid and said, "Oh my God," the green eye of the little yellow
Yes?
God, I think. Now, how can G.E.R.B suddenly break away from the pattern they've done in the government service and give you the 39% for parity with people in the healthcare service when other civil servants only got 8, whatever it was? 8.
Yes.
He's in a tough spot, isn't he?
Well,
G.E.R.B.
he is in a tough spot. He says that we gave him some ultimatums, which is erroneous, and I should point out to the members that Mr. Davison hasn't even been at our negotiating table since we commenced in January. We did not give him ultimatums. We gave him bargaining positions. He said that G.E.R.B has really nowhere to go, and we say, yes, they do. They can go up. They are offering us 26%, and that is just inefficient based on a number of guidelines that are contained within legislation.
When did your contract expire?
December 31st, 79, and we concluded it on December the 7th, 79. We had 24 days of a 1978-79 agreement.
You've had no contract during 1980 at all? I mean, just the existing contract.
Just
but
the existing contract.
you're now negotiating for January 1980, is that correct?
That's correct.
With retroactive pay for any increases you get?
Well, it's interesting because yesterday on our strike issue, we were informed that the employer now has ruled out a number of those benefits currently in the collective agreement. And to cite an example which has angered our nurses tremendously is the fact that one of our nurses, her grandmother died, and she wished to attend her grandmother's funeral. She asked for leave of absence with pay, and it was denied.
5 days she's entitled to, isn't she?
Yes, but she asked for 1 day. Then she asked for a day for a leave of absence without pay so she could attend the funeral. That was denied from Victoria. And so I have, in order for her to attend that funeral, I have had to ask her to inform the employer that she is on strike for the day of her grandmother's funeral in order for her to attend.
You're telling me...
This is the sort of process that concerns me, Jack, when you say something about retroactive pay.
You're telling me, therefore, that they seem to be taking the position that certain little fringe benefits are now not existing anymore until you sign a new contract.
That's true, and there's some reality to that, but it's certainly in this case where there's some factors, emotional factors involved, I think they're pretty tight.
I'm going to have a couple of minutes with George Neeson before I take my break. George Neeson is the spokesman for the Psychiatric Nurses Association. Are you in a parallel position as far as money is concerned?
Yes, we bargain as one union.
You bargain as one union?
Yes, a joint certification.
I saw a piece here that it was badly phrased, mind you, by some reporter or other, but it certainly caught my eye. Under a new hospital employees union agreement signed last week, hospital cleaner with no education, they mean no educational qualifications, scrubs and waxes corridors for $13.89 a month. A housekeeping aide earns $1,295 a month. What do your people get under the present situation?
The nurse one who's just starting gets $13.61.
She'd do better as a scrub cleaner.
She certainly would without going to school.
This has been the problem all along, has it not, Nora Paton?
It certainly has, Jack Webster.
Because the other people jumped up behind you and became too close, so we, the taxpayers, must now finance the increase because of educational qualifications.
Well, not just for educational qualifications, for the responsibilities of the jobs that these people hold.
Can't argue that. What do you want now? Have you made a request for an industrial inquiry commissioner?
Yes, 2 evenings ago, Jack, I talked with the Minister of Labour and sought, on behalf of the committee and the BC Government Nurses Union, a request for an industrial inquiry commissioner, which is non-binding. I sought this on the basis that I foresee continuing disruption of services to the public and to him as an employer, and somewhere along the line we've got to settle this agreement, somewhere. And
settle for what the BCGEU said.
the nurses have already said, quite frankly, no to 8, 8, and 8.
Did you have a strike vote?
We had a strike vote last December,
December 1980?
1979.
And you're still going on that strike vote?
That's correct.
Good one, for your point of view?
Yes, that was even before negotiations began, and that was 91%.
Well, you're not going to take another strike vote then, are
No,
you?
we don't have to. Our strike mandate is right on until this whole dispute ends now.
Where does it all end? I don't know. Next, my thanks to Nora Paton, George Neeson, and Glen Smale. Next, I'm going to interview Mike Davison of G.E.R.B, the Government Employee Relations Bureau, if I've got that right, in Victoria, on the microwave, after the break. Good morning, Mr. Davison.
Good morning.
Mike Davison is, of course, you're the director of G.E.R.B, you're not, Mr. Davison?
I'm chairman, Jack.
Chairman of G.E.R.B. What does that actually mean? I've never really checked it out.
Well, I have the status of a deputy minister.
No, but G.E.R.B itself, government...
Well, G.E.R.B is the bargaining agency on behalf of Treasury Board, which is the certified bargaining agent for the government in dealing with its public service employees in collective bargaining.
Are you going to recommend to the government that they appoint an Industrial Inquiry Commission non-binding to deal with the continued disputes involving the government nurses and the psychiatric nurses?
Jack, that's a decision for the minister to make, but what I'd like to do, with your permission, to start this off is give you some little historical background on the dispute that we're in.
Yes, please.
Which is really now not a catch-22, but if I may say so, a catch-44.
Right. Good crack.
What has happened is this. When I first came into bargaining for the government in 1976, at that time, I decided that the criteria for comparison with our nurses should be the general hospital nurses.
Fair enough.
Because they were the larger group and should accordingly set the pattern. That position was made clear to our government nurses, and I asked them to, and they agreed, to change the term of the agreement, because some of it didn't coincide, to coincide with the same agreement that the general hospital nurses agreement.
Right.
That was achieved. Also, for 1976-1977, the salary levels were set identical to those in the general hospital.
Right.
That was my position then. That was their basic position, of course, was that they certainly didn't want to go below, and particularly in reference to the psychiatric nurses, they told me, and I'm not sure when this occurred, that for many years they fought very hard to achieve parity with the registered nurses, and there was no way they were going to go back on that.
Right.
That wasn't a problem for me. I was quite content to agree with them on that. But what has happened for the 1978-1979 contract period, they reversed their field. They abandoned the comparability principle that they'd always gone along with before and decided to go a different route. And the reason for that was that when the General Hospital settlement came down, the General Hospital settlement collective agreement did not contain a reduction of hours of work to 35, which they had looked for.
Right.
And so they came to us and said, we, in our bargaining, want to get a 35-hour work week.
As other government employees under the BCGEU.
That's right. That was their answer. But I had said to them, well, look, you're professionals, don't you, and shouldn't you be compared to the general hospital nurses?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, no, we work in institutions where the people, all that work there, all work 35 hours a week, and we want to do the same. Well, our view was that if we conceded a 35-hour work week, we'd set a pattern for 12 to 15,000 nurses in the general hospitals that the hospitals all would be rather indignant about.
Right.
So we resisted this, and the nurses exercised their right, which is their right, and applied for arbitration under the Essential Services Disputes Act.
Right.
Now, it's all ironic because when we went before that board, we were arguing, that is, the Bureau was arguing, that the comparability should be with the general hospitals, and our government nurses union was arguing, no, the comparability should be based on internal relationships with in the public service.
You think they hanged themselves on that one?
They made the bed in which they now lie. And, of course, it isn't a very pleasant place for me to be either, of course.
No.
Now, what happened there is that these arguments persisted, and I might say for some clarification, because there's a lot of talk about delay, is that we negotiated for 7 months, and a lot of that period of time was taken up waiting to find out what the general hospitals did, and quite understandably so. And then, for the next period of time, for the remaining period of 2 years, the time was taken up by the deliberations of this arbitration board, which did a succession of awards. And I have with me the award which gave them, that is, gave the government nurses a 35-hour work week. And what, in effect, the board said was this. When they were talking about our argument about comparability with the general hospitals, they said in very clear language, and their exact language was, that that was not an appropriate basis for comparison. In other words, they threw our arguments out the window.
And accepted the nurses.
They accepted the nurses' argument. Now, it's a 3-man board. The decision was given by the chairman and the nurses' representative to the effect that internal equity, or internal comparison, was the paramount matter to be looked at. Now, I went a little further than that. What they particularly wanted was to establish a differential between what most people call the practical, technical person, what we call the healthcare worker,
Right.
and which in the general hospital is talked about as a practical nurse. They wanted to establish a differential between the top level of the healthcare worker 2, and the healthcare worker 2 has 5 steps over 5 years to get there. So at the very top level, and the bottom level of a nurse 1, which is the same as a ward nurse in a general hospital. And they wanted a differential set, which in their mind would be reasonable. The board accepted our argument and established a differential. And when we were talking about, one of the things they said here, and this is their exact words, they're talking about the government nurses union now. They said this: they have hitched their wagon to the star of parity which shines over the non-nurse government employee. That's what the board said.
So you reckon they're stuck with it all the way now?
Well, they put me in this position, which is ironic because it wasn't my position, it's theirs, that they have in writing now an award which was deliberated over by many months, and which considered other arbitration awards, brought in experts from the university, brought in experts even from the labor field, such as Emil Bjarnson, who spoke out on this matter in the papers, and examined the matter thoroughly and determined what the level of salary should be for government nurses, and did it in comparison to the people who work at the technical level and who are members of the other union, the BCGEU.
I've got the picture.
Okay.
You're now in the ironic situation whereby you had argued for comparability. The board and their representative had come down for a special status as government nurses, correct? With the 35-hour week.
Yes, and don't forget, one of the criteria in this study under the Essential Services Act, and the #1 criteria, although boards haven't said they're listed in order of importance, but they are very important, is that the board has to take into consideration the public interest. And I assume they did, and in fact they said they did.
Well, now we have an impasse. The only way the nurses seem to want to go at the moment, the government nurses, is for a non-binding industrial inquiry commission. Is that possible? Or is the position of the government, and you might say the position of the government, that they must go along now with the comparability with government employees as laid down by the board?
Well, I don't think where we are right now is so bad. Now, let me point one thing out. First of all, when we came into this set of bargaining for 1980, on a comparison basis with the general hospitals, in my view, if you do it on an hourly basis, our nurses were very much ahead of the general hospitals. So I have no quarrel at all with the nurses in the general hospitals catching up to us. And that, in effect, they have done, and done even more than that, of course. They haven't caught up originally, and then later on they've leapfrogged. But the fact is, when we came into bargaining, and I think Mr. Smale mentioned this, that our nurses were ahead by
4%.
4.4%. They're also ahead by the difference in hours they worked. Now, there is a dispute or a little difference of opinion as to how much that is worth, but it ranges only between 7.1% and 7.6%. So if you take the nurses figure, which is 7.1, and add it to 4.4, then you have them 11.5% on hours worked ahead of the general hospitals. And I can understand the general hospitals saying they want to catch up to that, either by getting the reduction or getting the relevant per hour rate.
What's the situation as of today? Are you still negotiating, or is...
No, we're negotiating. Mr. Smale said there was no ultimatums to me.
That's right.
Well, the ultimatums weren't made to me personally. They were made to my bargaining group, and they were in the form of 3 questions. If the answer wasn't yes, that was the end of the matter, and that's an ultimatum as far as I can make out.
What were the 3 questions? Were they simple
Well,
ones?
one, will you accept the monthly rate that has been negotiated or tentatively agreed to by H.L.R.A.? Now, that doesn't take into consideration the hours they work. Will you accept the monthly rate? That's one.
You said no.
Yes. Number 2, will you accept exactly the same term? And it's a strange term. It's 27 months. And third, will you accept the exact same vacations? And these answers were all no, and they weren't in a sense that what our position was unacceptable, let's negotiate some more. Unless you say yes to all these questions, 3 in number, then that's the end of the game.
Well, and from my point of view, knowing nothing about it, Mr. Davison, it would seem to me that how can you compare the contract of the general hospital nurse with the contract of a government nurse under your different hours of work?
Well, you can't, and you're not supposed to, according to this arbitration award, because they've said now it's irrelevant.
Were you happy with what Fryer said? With John Fryer's famous statement that he thought it was far too big a settlement for the nurses?
Well...
That it would cause severe problems in the labor relations movement in BC?
I think if you sit in Mr. Fryer's position, you can understand why he was upset.
Because he only got 8, 8, and 8.
Well, it isn't a question of only. At the time that was settled, that was a very good settlement, because you must remember that when we settled this in 1979, and he got an 8% in the first year. At that time, most of the first-year settlements were around 7.5%. And the reason he got 8% in the first year instead of 7.5% was basically because eventually we agreed on a 3-year agreement. So there was something in it for both of us, and it was a fair settlement.
Just to add it up and kind of conclude our little interview here on the subject, it looks grim at the moment. The nurses are demanding their Industrial Inquiry Commission. They've already started to strike. And do you have any hopes of coming anyway to meet them, Mr. Davison?
Well, I think, frankly, I take the position that the ball's in their court. They produce the ultimatums. If they say that the ultimatums are negotiable, my instinct is always to try and negotiate. I'm not very happy with third parties. I don't see how they can be very comfortable with their strike vote when they took the unusual step of having a strike vote prior to even giving notice to commence collective bargaining. I'm not sure what the nurses voted on. I suspect they voted in frustration and annoyance how long it took them to get an agreement for last time, and I can't blame them for that.
Okay, Mr. Davison, I'm running over time on this, and I know you're not, probably would create shambles if we all mixed in together, so I'll raise a couple of points with the nurses representatives here now, and you might be good enough to stay in the studio and watch them in Victoria. Okay?
Right, thank you, Jack.
Don't go away, though. My thanks to Mr. Michael Davison. I almost called him somebody else. Michael Davison, the chairman of G.E.R.B, speaking from our studio in the Parliament buildings in Victoria. After the break. No calls. But you're going to announce something between 9 and 10. Have you announced anything for your strike plans for today?
No, there's
When are you going to announce them?
an embargo on an announcement.
Until when?
Noon.
At noon you're going to announce today's strike plans. Mr. Davison told me just now, Mr. Smale, that, you know, faced with the ultimatums, what could he kind of do? No, no, no to your 3 questions. But surely you're still willing to negotiate face to face.
Well, that's correct, Jack, and I think Mr. Davison certainly takes a number of liberties with his views of those particular ultimatums. The actual question that caused us to place a strike mandate, not a mandate, but the actual notice to strike was one placed by the mediator. And that was the question that will the employer agree with the principle of comparability with the nurses in the general hospitals? And the employer said no, and that was the only question.
But doesn't he have a reasonable case? What about your board decision, which came up and said your man and the chairman went for the government side of the cause instead of your own comparability side of the cause? Doesn't that leave you embarrassed?
No, not at all, because again, Mr. Davison takes a tremendous number of liberties with this award. The board considered many, many factors when it came to reaching a decision based on this award, which gave the nurses in the BC government 8% in 1979. It said, and I'm quoting here, "We have concluded on the basis of the above considerations," plural, not one item. That, in my mind, is the only defense that they have.
Does the R.N.A.B.C have a 35-hour week?
It does not.
The government nurses have a 35-hour week?
Yes, and some of them have since 1974, Jack, and the wages have been comparable.
You take that into consideration in your comparability of wages? Is the government contract, though, for government employees not much better in its fringe benefits than the R.N.A.B.C one?
Up until last year, it was superior. Now
until last year?
1979. Now, with this recent proposed terms of settlement, they're pretty well parallel, Jack.
Well, there's nothing I can do about it. Obviously, you'll sit down and talk with the people if they call a meeting. Or do you want to invite Mr. Davison's bargainers to meet with you again now?
Until they move from their 8, 8, and 8, there's no sense in talking.
But it's the comparability that's the snag, is it not?
There is some irony in both parties' positions, yes.
In other words, you both got egg on your face to a point.
Well, I think most of the egg is scrambled over in Victoria.
And the public suffers in the meantime.
Well, they haven't suffered to date, Jack.
But you're going to announce new strike plans of some kind today at noon?
That's correct.
But surely you won't walk away from places like Riverview, and leave them unprotected.
That's a distinct possibility, but we will maintain essential services when we do get to those areas, if we do.
You will maintain essential services?
Yes.
Yes.
And you too will maintain essential services?
Yes, we've made that statement right from the...
Mr. Davison, thank you for standing by in Victoria. Nothing more I can do. I've done my best to explain a complicated situation. I shall now leave it to you to knock each other's heads together and get the settlement. Thank you, Mr. Davison. Davison, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Jack. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Webster after the break. I have a question off the topic for reporter Brian Coxford. Why didn't you bring me back a steak from the Reverend Taylor's barbecue? Beautiful big steaks, weren't they? You must have had a ball on that job.
Maybe he'll send you one.
I don't know. No, that's payola. I just thought if you'd happened to bring a piece, I could have had it on a sandwich.
Yeah, actually, those the steaks were part of his annual Labor Day barbecue. So we were using shots from that particular part of the sequence of events.
Now, on your instructions this morning, I showed large quantities of milk being gushing down a sewer in a farm of an unhappy farmer in Delta, British Columbia. And I know it's a complicated story, and I know there are government regulations coming out of your ears. Roughly speaking, because you can't get a certain type of industrial quota for production of milk byproducts, such as yogurt,
Ice creams, milk powders, etc.
Milk powders.
To put it in its very simplest form, you have a fluid milk quota.
Which you buy for cash.
Yeah, which you buy for cash.
And he doesn't have one.
Which is administered by the province and run by the province.
And he doesn't have one.
And he doesn't have one.
Because you can't get them.
Then there's another kind of quota, which is called the industrial milk quota, which is your ice creams, your yogurts, and everything other than the fluid. That's awarded by the federal government on an historical basis, like, you know, Quebec gets so many percentage, Ontario, BC, etc. It's based on an historical production system.
So here's this guy with all these lovely looking Jersey cows, and he hasn't got either kind of quota, neither the food one provincial, nor the industrial one federal, and I have to show this milk going down the tube.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Anyway, the gist of it is you have to run against a cement wall and wait until somebody in the milk board gives you quota, and it might take up to 5 years. This couple that we're going to tell you about has already waited for 2. It's fresh milk being dumped down the sewer, and up to 115 gallons of nature's most natural food is being wasted every day on this Delta dairy farm.
This is one of those great stories about the free enterprise system as it applies to farming. First of all, government imposes a land freeze to encourage agricultural development. The farmer is supposed to stay on the land and produce. Then a different kind of government red tape prevents him from selling his product.
The product they can't sell because it's illegal to do so in BC is raw milk. The dairy branch of the provincial government says because of its bacterial count, raw milk must be processed to be sold to the public. And to be able to do that, the dairy farmer must have market quota, or a share of the milk market controlled by the Milk Marketing Board. Marge and Ellen Savage are dairy farmers without quota. And these are their cows, or at least one of them. There are 41 other jerseys like this. They have to be milked twice a day, regardless of the milk board policy on quotas. And this is the farm in Delta where the milking takes place, and where the raw milk is dumped down the drain every day.
Has anyone in government been able to tell you at all, why you're sort of in a situation every day where you've got to pull the pin and let the tap go and dump all this milk down the drain?
Well, yes, because we can't sell it raw. We are legally not allowed to sell it as fluid milk. And so they've just said that that we simply have to find a way, a means to market it, which means either selling it to a dairy, buying quota, and we would like to process it. We would like to make byproducts, cultured products such as yogurt and possibly ice cream and things like that with it. Utilize it ourselves.
Are you talking about setting up your own operation?
Yes, setting up our own dairy, marketing it from here and through health food stores or chain stores or whatever, but marketing it ourselves and producing it and processing it ourselves.
Their cows are jerseys. They're in a minority in the dairy business these days. Their milk is of richer quality, suitable for such products as yogurts. And the Savages are prepared to spend $100,000 to get the machinery to set up their own plant to produce pure dairy products.
It's a portable plant available to us. I think we could probably have it here in about 2 to 3 months. It's a portable unit. It's just a matter of as long as it meets all standards and we get the license to operate it, then there's no reason why it wouldn't work. And then it's just a matter of us finding a market for our product and going from there.
And the Savages believe there is a ready-made market for their type of pure products without the additives that they want to produce. Health food stores. There are 1,000 of them across the country, 250 in BC alone, and their numbers are on the increase, and so is the business. And in this store on South Granville, owned by Croft Woodruff, president of the Canadian Health Food Association, 3 types of health food yogurts are sold. Nature's Treat, a product of Palm Dairies, Lifestream, made by Dairyland, and Continental of Los Angeles. And Woodruff says he'd gladly replace the American yogurt with another local product if it were available.
If a company was to produce, say, in the neighborhood of about 1,000 pounds of yogurt on a daily basis in this market for health food stores, could they handle it?
Definitely.
What would it represent? Maybe just a drop in the bucket, or would be
I feel that it would be considered a drop in the bucket.
But if you want to produce a pure yogurt, and you're not one of the big dairies, the deck is stacked against you. There's not one, but 2 government obstacles to hurdle.
As far as the dairy branch of BC is concerned, as far as our plant is concerned, as far as the actual processing of our product is concerned, there isn't a real problem. As long as we come up to the standards that are required to produce the product, we can go ahead. But we cannot produce a product if we don't own some form of quota. And this is the block that we have.
When the Savages talk about being granted quota to be able to set up their tiny dairy farm, that's when it gets complicated. Cows produce milk twice
In there for us, because you know, while most farmers are own quota and ship through a dairy with quota, we feel that we have a special place in the dairy industry, and there must be somebody that can appreciate that fact. So far, we haven't found them.
So the Savages have no quota, but they have plenty of raw milk. The Milk Board is sympathetic, but says every farmer waiting for quota must be treated the same, even though their proposals vary. And there's another twist in this story. The Savages have a date in court in July because they've been charged with selling some of that raw milk instead of dumping it all down the sewer. And as we told you at the outset, it's illegal in this province to sell raw milk, even though it's more nutritious. Some people prefer it, and farmers have been drinking it all their lives. If they lose in court, their wait for quota will be over anyway, because it's totally uneconomical to continue milking cows and pouring it all down the drain year after year.
The ordinary chap can never really understand that, but as I get from your report there, about 70%? No, 47%?
There's 77% Ontario and Quebec.
Got it. Ontario and Quebec have 77% of all the industrial milk quota allocated by the federal government, and the balance, 23%, is divided across the rest of Canada.
Yeah. With the exception of Newfoundland, it doesn't take part in it.
BC has 3% of the industrial quota.
But yeah, they have 3% despite the fact they have 11% of the population and 11% of the consumption.
You got to feel sorry for these people, because if they don't get that industrial quota, and they've been waiting 2 years now, they're just going to have to get rid of the herd. Isn't that right?
Yep.
And as you say, they're up on a charge now of selling milk.
Selling the
raw milk.
Raw milk.
For human consumption.
Well, they put up a sign that says not for human consumption.
Only suitable for animal feed.
Only suitable for animal feed.
Fair enough. Now, there's another little gimmicky thing I wanted you to check out for me, and I do believe you have done it. C.H.I.P program.
Yeah, this is one of these energy conservation measures that the federal government has put out. It's called C.H.I.P, which stands for Canadian Home Insulation Program, and that's where they encouraged everybody who had an older home, go out, get your home insulated, and we'll give you a grant.
And the Home Heat Centre puts out a pamphlet which shows as follows.
We'll show you the application here. This is basically, the little thing with the flag on it is the federal government's application grant.
But I want to read that piece in the black circle.
And
can I read that piece in the black circle?
Yeah, the brochure that's laid on top basically says, if we can go in a little closer on that brochure.
Let's go back to the black circle, please. Okay, now would somebody read that out for me, because it's the only copy of the pamphlet we've got.
Yeah.
This could be yours, a $500 grant from the Canadian Federal C.H.I.P grant. If your home was built before 1960, you never have to pay it back.
Now that's the company that's going to do the insulation work for them.
That's the Home Heat Centre in this particular case, to whom you have spoken.
Yeah.
And yesterday I got a phone call from a friend of mine who says, what's this nonsense about never having to pay it back? I just got a T4 C.H.I.P. Now we'll see what the small print in the C.H.I.P form says. Bring up the small print in the C.H.I.P form, please. The small print. And in this very small print behind there, I understand the applicant has to say that this is a taxable grant and that the applicant is the spouse having the higher taxable income. The gimmick, dear listener, being that the Home Heat Centre, I believe in all honesty,
they were sort of under the impression, as I think most Canadians were, that it's an applicant's grant.
And you get that grant, and as the Home Heat Centre says, you never have to pay it back.
Yeah,
but what happens instead is that you get a let me see it.
T4 C.H.I.P.
A T4 C.H.I.P. In this particular case, this particular friend of mine whose house was built before 1960 applied for and got a grant. He got the $500 of the work done, and he got a grant of $399.66.
That's his tax. The grant was $548.
No, you're wrong. The cost was $548.
Yeah.
The grant he got was $399.66.
Okay.
But he gets with it. This is discussing it on the air in truth. He gets with it a T4 for $399 which he must attach to his income tax, and he therefore pays back at his taxable rate part of the $399, making a liar out of the home heat centre. But you never have to pay it back, because if he's on a 25% rate of tax, he pays back precisely $100.
And incidentally, the home heat center says they're in the process right now
Don't show his name. Don't show his name.
of changing their
Form.
So it won't say on there from now on that you get it for nothing.
I won't say you never have to pay it back.
Right.
It says you only have to pay back that portion of the grant on the T4 which is applicable against your income tax income at the end of the year when you submit your form to the computer thing in Ottawa.
Incidentally, the federal government, too, is in the process of revamping its communication in connection with this so that maybe you'll know what's going on in the first place.
Small print. So damn small you couldn't read it with a magnifying glass. So it's a chip off the old chip block. Please be careful. You'll get a T4 for your chip grant, and you must attach it to your income tax return. What's next, Brian?
You're going to the phones, aren't you?
Now I've got to do a piece on Hoskins, drugs. Then we'll go to the phones. And I know what you can do about that milk.
It's
Seems terrible to me.
You know, you
After the
can't
break.
win situation.
No. After the break. Sometimes I get too personally involved in news stories that I hold off my comments on them until the thing has simmered down a little bit. Last week, I broke you the news that Bert Hoskins of the Alcohol and Drug Commission had submitted his resignation, and I think, perhaps to his surprise, his resignation was promptly accepted by Rafe Mayer, the Minister of Health. And I'm sure you remember how strongly I was in support of the initial compulsory heroin treatment bill. Although I did ask McClellan at the time, when he came on to announce it on here, if it's a flop, will you scrap it? And he said, in effect, yes. Well, he was scrapped instead. Mayer took over the portfolio, and he went to energy. And I've been keeping a fairly close eye on what's been happening to the compulsory heroin treatment situation. And I think it can be said to have become a shambles. I don't think there's any doubt about that whatsoever. Had it gone ahead on a proper legal basis from day one, it might well have been a shining, bold, successful experiment to deal with certain types of heroin addicts in British Columbia, especially the younger ones. But we know what happened. First of all, there was great government indecision, under pressure, some of it vastly exaggerated, from the so-called civil liberties people. And after that came the test in the courts, and the compulsory heroin treatment program was ruled unconstitutional, which gave me another chance to nag and say, why bring in these acts if you haven't got sound legal advice that can tell you pretty certainly in advance whether or not your law is going to stand up under attack in this confused Canada where you have divided jurisdictions, where you have criminal codes and provincial health laws, and as in this case, everything fell in between. We all know the grandiose plans, and we know what happened to them. We know that Brannan Lake, while it didn't become the luxury health spa that some smart aleck reporters seemed to think it did become, was not a success. That as of the time of the resignation of Mr. Hoskins, there were about 500 people in various forms of heavy drug treatment, of which 200 were still on the old methadone. And we had a vast $15 million budget, and they had nothing but trouble in trying to set up community centers, community care, and community treatment. And it became perfectly obvious that the expenditure of public money for such what had become such a nebulous program was no longer desirable. Bob Williamson in the Globe and Mail in Vancouver wrote a very good piece about it, pointing out that it has been a very difficult 6 months for Bert Hoskins, and that he quit in the face of mounting evidence that his ideas may be unworkable or illegal or both. And Williamson pointed out, too, that his resignation, ostensibly in a huff over budget cuts, came at a time when the controversial compulsory heroin treatment program he helped draft for the provincial government is in a hopeless shambles. There is one sign of hope, though, on this. It would seem that while we are still one of the largest entry points for heroin from Southeast Asia to all North American traffickers, it would seem that the police clue activities have been remarkably successful, and that heroin crimes in British Columbia, I think, are down considerably. I think, too, that the very injection of the potentially compulsory heroin treatment plan did a fair amount of good. May have quite selfishly chased a number of addicts out of the province of British Columbia, and may have brought a number of youngsters to realization that one of these days down the road there's going to be a real hammer on those who use heroin. So we're back to the policy now of methadone, benign neglect, and hopefully chasing the traffickers out of the province wherever possible. I'm sorry about that. Very genuine, dedicated, sincere man with strong ideas. But when you don't get backing from your government in the first place, and you're under attack from all quarters in the second place, and the situation does seem to be improving of its own volition one way or another, I think it's correct now that we should go back to the policy. I don't recommend setting up some great alternative to treating drugs now in British Columbia. I do suggest that we concentrate a little bit stronger on the alcohol programs, and perhaps for the old-time addicts, benign neglect and methadone is the best answer, and education for the youngsters, the best answer for them. Haven't done a free-for-all for a while. I'm going to go to the phones now. From now till the end of the program, after the break. We got the phones fixed. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
I didn't catch the whole segment on the Delta farmers that are having trouble selling their milk. But it seems to me, and this is something that really bothers me, is I was wondering now, how long do they have to wait before they can get through all this bureaucratic red tape?
Well, no, there are two forms of quota. If you want to become a dairy farmer in British Columbia, you got to buy a quota. If you want milk to go to dairy land, you got to buy a quota, and it costs you thousands and thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. The industrial quota is allocated by Ottawa. What they want to do is not sell fresh milk, but to sell yogurt and other processed items. They've got to wait till, they've been waiting 2 years now. Now maybe some bureaucrat in Ottawa can say, people in Ontario or the Ottawa Valley have a better case than you have. But it does seem a shame to me. It's just another marketing board problem, really. We're controlled entirely by marketing boards, and if they're efficient and share the quotas properly, everybody's happy, and if they don't, you get farmers like our friends in Delta who are living off what crops they have and trying hard to stay in business until they can get a yogurt quota.
Now this,
But again, you're a big boy when you go into that. It's like our friend Zanetti Pasta, whom I think was a bit naive at the beginning, and Brian's reports and brooding certainly helped the authorities to deal with Zanetti a little bit more reasonably. And perhaps this kind of program too might waken up somebody here who would say, hey, let's write another letter or phone somebody in Ottawa and give these people the tiny quota they want.
well, hopefully, but can they not sell their milk at all?
No, it's raw milk. It's not, hasn't gone through the process. It's not fit for human consumption according to the milk board.
Okay, but could they not sell it for, say, animal consumption?
Yes, they can.
They can.
But they're up in court about it at the end of the month or something.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, yes.
That seems to be pretty ridiculous. Is there no member or person that belongs to the health department or something? These people that go around and check?
No, they can't do that because that milk doesn't qualify for inspection for human consumption.
For crying out loud. That's
Okay, that's a fact, love. Go ahead, please.
Hello, John?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, an interesting story came to me a little while ago, and I'd like to share it with you. About 4 years ago, a couple had a young child, and the neighbors and everybody around complained that the child had bruises and was bad. nothing was done. Finally, one day the police went in and on a call, and they found this child dead.
Are you talking about a rumor or what?
This isn't a rumor. This is a fact.
When did it happen?
This happened 4 years ago.
Was it dealt with by the authorities at the time? Sure it was.
It was dealt with by the authorities at the time. The woman was sentenced to go to jail. Okay, while in jail, the woman had another child, became pregnant in jail. While she was in jail, became pregnant.
I mean, how do I know what you're telling me is true? Were you involved in it? Is it part of your family story?
No, but I have been involved in it. Or, no, I do have good knowledge of this here case.
But what do you want to achieve now? Just to tell the horrible story?
No, let me finish it. Okay, this woman had the child in jail. Okay, the kid was approximately 18 months old when the woman was released with the child. 3 days later, this happened 3 weeks ago, the woman was released from jail with the child. Okay? 3 days after that, after she got out.
Uh-huh. Hold on, and I knew you were going to say that. Hold on, please. Hold on. Take his number, will you, please? You got it? That's why I hate taking these gruesome stories live on the phone, which is why I picked it up so you couldn't hear what I thought he'd tell me at the end, so that we don't do anybody unjust damage about any particular aspect. You got to watch these things. Where am I going? Where'll I go, Linda? Oh, hold on, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Webster. Would it have been a good idea to have Mr. Kinnear on the same program as the people on mortgage interest the other day?
I don't think it would have added a thing to the program.
Wouldn't I? Yeah.
But by the way, talking about the nurses, the BC Fed are quite upset with the nurses who may well be picketing other operations, and the only other operations they can picket are those of the BCGEU, and they're going to be very angry about it. Now, I don't think Kinnear could have helped anything about the housing program. I just have got a line of dogma. Smithers, BC, you want a break? Already? I'll take a call, then I'll take a break. Go ahead from Smithers.
I just wanted to make the point that it's very annoying when nurses bring up the point that the people that are scrubbing the halls and so on get such and so a wage. A nurse, his job is much more rewarding than scrubbing halls, and if she had a choice, she would probably continue to nurse because it's a more rewarding job, and I don't think they should always make that comparison, and it usually is made.
Yeah, well, and I threw it out this morning too, because you see that was the cause of the 44% increase, because the practicals were allowed to catch up on the R.N.A.B.C.
The people that are scrubbing halls, probably many of them would like to nurse if they'd had the opportunity of the
and the education. A good point, ma'am. Thank you. After the break. Bellingham, go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Speak up to a cheesehead.
Good morning, Jack. How you doing this morning?
Good.
Say, we're visiting over here from Idaho. We think of you folks in Canada as one of our best neighbors. And I'd like to address you on that milk problem.
Yeah.
Just west of Boise, Idaho, there's a little town called Nampa.
Uh-huh.
They have a cheese factory down there that was developed to take care of this here problem we had with the raw milk.
Mm-hmm.
The dairies, home dairies, and Meadow Gold just couldn't take it all at one time, so they just formed a cooperative, put it in a cheese factory, and...
But you live in a free country still. Well, you're still in a free country. We're ruled by boards and boards and boards and boards.
Well, we think you guys have it pretty well under control, too.
No, how much... everything in your country is cheaper than ours, except your interest rates.
Well...
Listen, what are you doing in Bellingham from Boise?
Visiting up here. We wanted to see what tidal pools are like and show the kids around.
And stay away from Mount St. Helens.
Thank you for your advice.
And thanks for watching a foreign program.
You bet. Thank you much,
Thanks
Jack.
a lot. Bye. We're going to have a foreign correspondent from Toronto here tomorrow. Oh, guy that really annoys the devil out of me. He writes a book called Smoke and Mirrors, Television News in Canada. He means television news in Toronto. I may cancel him out today. The book annoyed me so much. I'm not going to tell you his name either. You know, these guys in Toronto. so. No comment. And that's not for publication. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, good morning.
Morning.
I'd just like to make a couple of comments and observations on your statements about the Heroin Treatment Act. I was an addict for a number of years, and I have ceased to become an addict 10 years ago, so I think I can speak with some authority. As far as Bert Hoskins is concerned, he had absolutely no credibility amongst the addicts on the street.
Who has? Come off it. Who's got credibility among addicts on the street?
Well, sir.
Oh, come off it. Don't give me that garbage.
Well, I know you protect them, Jack, and you...
Not protect them, but I know a fair number of addicts, too. What credibility did they ever have except we want free drugs?
Well, maybe that's the answer, too, but I wouldn't want to argue
Benign
that.
neglect. I'm beginning to think benign neglect. It would wipe out corruption in police forces.
The other point I'd like to make, Jack, is granted the police have done a considerably good job of cleaning up or trying to clean up the heroin situation here, but also the greed of the people at the top end of the situation who make the most money became so heavy that the product that hits the street is so poor compared to what it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I can't say this from first-hand knowledge, but I know a few people.
I'm glad you can't, and and I'm glad to hear your call, but don't tell me that addicts on the street or traffickers or any of these people have any credibility. Because they don't. Thank you very much. After the break.
Well, you didn't mention his name, but it is Peter Truman from Global News.
Television news in Toronto.
Yes.
Book annoyed me. What else?
A follow-up of the Alexandra Buchanan case.
The last chapter in the case of Alexander Buchanan, the one we had out with the College of Dental Surgeons and with the family. It's a good story for tomorrow morning.
And one of Menachem Begin's right-hand men.
Middle East politics.
Yes.
One of my favorite areas of discussion. And Peter?
Truman.
9 a.m. precisely.